On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Cindy Chu. She is the VP of Engineering at imgix. We're going to be talking about actually female leadership in engineering. We're going to talk about growing your team in a diverse way. Cindy has a fantastic background in the technology space, and she shared with me some notes as to how she's been able to grow her current team at imgix with a diverse mindset. And I think everyone's always trying to get there, and she's actually doing it. So super excited to have you on, Cindy, to share with us.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. All right. So let's start at the top. I always ask for two things. One is tell us what your company does, and then just what are the responsibilities as the VP engineering there?
Sure. imgix is a sophisticated imgix and video API that powers visual media for websites and apps. And as VP of engineering, my job is to make sure that my entire team has everything that they need in order to do what they do best.
Awesome. So I guess the topic we're talking about, I guess it's commonplace in the industry. Everyone would like a more diverse work group. That's, I think, half of all tech companies. That's what they're striving for. Not half, probably all. And I think everyone is trying to get there. And, I always hear as a recruiting company owner, the challenges that they see and some of the shortcomings of why they don't get there. But the numbers you shared with me and some of the information, we talked about off air was really compelling. I mean, you've done such a good job. Obviously, you're a very impressive engineering leader yourself. I guess let's, maybe start at the top about the current team, maybe just understanding how big your team just currently is in terms of, head count. And then we'll start diving into how you went about hiring and growing that team.
Sure. When I joined imgix in 2018, I think the team was about 10 and it's 30 plus now. When I joined, I was the only woman on the team. So I was the first and only woman hire in the engineering team. And now the team is about 25% women. I'd love it to be more, but I'm super proud of where we've gotten to over the last few years.
Yeah, 25% that's pretty good. I mean, I think so. A startup, again, in terms of the company overall, how big is the company?
The company is about 55 people.
Okay. That's actually pretty good. I mean, I know, some of those numbers are probably in line. I know startups have a different challenge. Obviously, you're not only hiring to grow at a certain speed, you have deliverables and roadmaps that are, pressures in other ways. But obviously, being able to hire a diverse, work team is very important. I guess when you got there, you're hired as the first female engineer in the company.
Mm-hmm.
When you get there, there's nobody else on the team that's a woman. Obviously, the company was smaller at that point. What was your mindset? Like, obviously, you're accomplished from the engineering standpoint, but obviously, you're the only female at the time.
Yeah. So I guess it started even from before I joined. I mean, when I was talking to imgix, it was really important to me that we were all on the same page about the importance of building a diverse team. And so when I talked to the CEO about it, he really wanted to fix the imbalance. I think he just really didn't know how. And I think it is really hard when you don't have any women on the team. It's really hard to bring in that first one, to cross that barrier, because even if you're interviewing women, they're showing up and they're not seeing themselves on the panel, right? They're not seeing an example of what it could be like for them to be at your company. So I do think crossing that initial barrier is difficult, but I wouldn't have joined if I didn't think that the rest of the company had my back on the importance of this initiative. After that, I was really trying to think about how would we show candidates that imgix would be an attractive place to work? And that really starts with actually making it an attractive place to work, making sure that the talent that we have is being retained, that they're enjoying their work. And I think for me, a lot of that comes down to making sure that, again, that the people I hire have room to do what we've hired them to do, right? So taking away meetings that are not useful for them, giving them autonomy. Engineers love to have responsibility. They want information about why we're doing what we're doing. They want to be bought into the strategy. So I think giving them those tools and making sure that they can afford to have a work-life balance. I think imgix is a bit more mature than some of the crazy, like 80-hour week startups that you hear about. And I think that's beneficial, not just for women, but for a lot of people who want to have, lives outside of work. So I think that's really where I started from. And then, it takes more work to find these women wherever they are. But if it's important to you, and it was certainly important to us, that you put in the time and you invest in the effort to go out and find these women, source more diverse pipelines. But again, it really starts from making sure that your work environment is a place where they're going to be happy.
Absolutely. And I guess that's maybe touching on a little bit of the inclusivity side of the equation, where it's one thing to go out and hire somebody who's diverse, hire a female. The other is to make them feel welcome, make them feel that they belong. It's, culture is a tricky word to use because it's so oversold, but having the right environment where somebody does feel safe, they feel comfortable, they feel as though they are on equal footing with everyone else. When obviously you came in with, being the first female engineering hire and you went about, hiring others to the team, were there specific things that you were looking to make sure you put in place, as you kind of allude to a few of them, about that inclusivity piece?
Yeah, I think transparency is one of the biggest ones. I think as women in tech, we're always told there aren't that many of us and that we need to behave more like men to get what we want. We're told women get paid less because we don't negotiate as well, right? And that is really putting the burden on us to fix our behavior, to change how we do things. So when it comes to things like compensation, for example, I try to be as transparent with the team as possible to say, look, these are the salary bands we use. We share data with other companies, like through a service called Option Impact, which I think is pretty standard for companies of our size. And I tell everyone, look, this is what we pay and it's standard for the industry. And I tell everyone that my goal is that if our compensation table was ever leaked, that I could look everyone in the eye and explain to them why they make what they make. And then it's not about who negotiated better or who came from a higher paying job, that it was really fair all the way around. And they trust me to make sure that I won't let that happen, where a man makes more just because he's a man in the same role.
Interesting. I guess as you're coming in and, surveying what needs to be adjusted and making those changes, when you're kind of looking at maybe the short term, the long term, obviously you were hired in a smaller stage company. I guess, were there specific short term things that you thought you could put in place that kind of helped, this diversity hiring?
That's a good question. As a woman, I think one of the easiest things for me to do at the time was just to be on the panels, just to meet all the candidates that were coming in. And so when we were small, that was definitely very doable for me, to actually talk to all the engineers or all the potential engineers who were coming in so that they could actually see that at least we did have some diversity on the team and they could feel a little bit more comfortable about that. As the team grew and we hired in more women, they were also able to be on those panels and to really showcase the types of folks that we have on the team. I do want to caution, I have been on teams in the past where I was added to interview panels just because they didn't have women. And I won't say necessarily that that's wrong because I think representation is really important. But I would get added for stuff that was completely outside of my area of expertise. And it was very clear that I was just like kind of being tokened out as you're the only woman that we know. So can you help and be on this panel? So I get that that is difficult again. But, for me, in my role here as head of engineering, right, it makes sense for me to actually talk to and interview everyone. So that actually worked out. So that was one of the easiest things to do, as well as to have me do the initial reach outs. Because when candidates are seeing an email coming from a woman head of engineering, I think that also helps them think a little bit differently about the company.
It sounds like a lot of, what you're talking about is being very intentional. You're obviously building the team. There's, some intentional steps that you're taking, obviously being on the panel, being that first point of contact, it certainly helps. And I guess the flip opposite, as you mentioned, when you're just being put on the panel because you're female, you're diverse. And I think sometimes when you hear those things, you're like, what are you accomplishing from that side of the house? Because obviously just saying, hey, someone's here, even if you manage to hire that person, they're going to come in if your environment isn't ready to have a diverse viewpoint, diverse mindset. that person might not be interested in staying long term, even though you might have made the initial hire because you had, somebody on the panel that made it look the way that you were hoping that it would be.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think making sure that the environment, right, that's the other half of the equation. You can't just bring people in. You have to make sure the environment is a safe place. And for us, a big part of that is constantly soliciting feedback, making sure that people feel okay about giving feedback, right? Not punishing people for it, really listening to what they're saying. Sometimes we'll make changes, right, based on what it is. We can't change everything, but, we really try to explain why we're not making changes if we're hearing, constant feedback. And sometimes it's just, things like we're just too small, like we're still a startup and that's not really something that we can manage right now, but here's what we can do instead. And so people feel like we take their feedback seriously and that it is valued and people feel like they can say what they want to say at work. And I think that really helps in terms of making a place where people do feel safe, where they feel valued, where they feel like they like coming to work every day.
And I guess when you maybe were to go back, I know you spent some time at Yahoo before you maybe held the official director of engineering, official title like that. Obviously, I know you were lead at Yahoo at some point. When you think back to the day, that's a few years ago, we'll provide you LinkedIn. People can go take a look at the chronology of your work history. But when you look back at that and kind of that's early before people really started talking about the need to have diverse hiring, when you were actually getting those opportunities, what kind of environment was that versus what you've created? And I know that's a big question, but I'm just curious at a high level, what were you seeing back then that you carried with you to obviously to make changes now that you're running your own engineering team?
I've actually worked at Yahoo twice. So Yahoo is where I first started my career. And then I left to join a startup called Polyvore. And Polyvore was eventually acquired by Yahoo.
There you go.
Yeah. So my tenure at Yahoo is a little bit interesting for sure. Early in my career, I would say that a lot of what I experienced, and this was not every team at Yahoo, so I don't really want to generalize it with this broad brush, but one of the most toxic things that I think I didn't realize until later was that productivity was rewarded at the cost of being able to work with your coworkers, I guess. So I've worked with several people who were really smart and they could write a lot of code, but nobody wanted to work with them. But they were still rewarded because, from a higher up perspective, they were quote unquote getting work done. And when I moved to Polyvore and now at imgix, we definitely have this policy. We call it the no jerks policy, where that kind of behavior is really not tolerated because you're trading off very short-term productivity for a long-term harm to the team, right? The team doesn't feel safe. They don't understand why you're rewarding someone who doesn't deserve it. This person who is quote unquote productive is not going to remain productive in the long term if they can't get people to work with them, right? And so you're harming like the long-term prospects of the team for very short-term gain. So we talk about that, during interview debriefs, right? Like this person's really smart, but I don't see us actually being able to work together because they're so defensive or they don't take feedback well, whatever other reason they have. And we're really careful about who we do bring into the team in that way. So that's one of the things I think that is really different. But even when I was at Yahoo, I think back then we've always cared about the problem of diversity and how do we make our workplaces more attractive for women and how do we get more women through the pipeline. So I don't think that's changed. It is a little bit sad that I think throughout my career, which spans over 15 years now, I don't feel like we've moved many needles in terms of the gender gap in tech.
And let me ask you about that. Yeah, and I mean, obviously, this is the ideal has been carried over for years. It's like you mentioned, hasn't moving the needle is part of the key. I have a 8-year-old, soon to be 9-year-old daughter, and I always talk about when we go to the Target aisle. It's not Toys R Us anymore because there's no Toys R Us. We go to the Target aisle. It's clearly gender split. Yeah, you will see Barbies in one section, boy toys in another aisle. And then when you go down the Lego aisle, you can see the girl Legos and the boy Legos on each side of the aisle. And I always look at that and I go, how am I supposed to make it different for her when walking down the aisle, they've already set her up, not to fail, but they've already set it up where there's a bias just walking down the aisle as to what aisle she should probably turn her head to. And I guess when you're looking at this problem and the needle hasn't been moved, and I know, you're also a mentor with different organizations, are we always trying to catch this problem too late? Is this, like if you were really going to solve this problem, is it going back into early education stages to really address, where the shortage of the talent would be? I mean, what are your thoughts?
That is a big question. And if I had an answer to that, I don't know that we would be talking, but I will address the parts that I think I can address. I don't mean to be all super doom and gloom, because the things that are different from when I was first coming up is the amount of women who are in the STEM pipeline at more junior levels. So there are more women graduating with CS degrees than when I was in school. I see so many young women who do want to join the industry. They're younger. And so I do think mentorship is a big part of that. That's really important to me, right? For women to see that people like me exist, that this job is possible, and that there actually are more of us than you think. We're hard to find sometimes, but that we actually do exist. So I'm part of this awesome group called Diversity, and you can find it on my LinkedIn profile, but it's a community for women engineering leaders. And this sounds really niche, but there's hundreds, thousands of us like in this group now. And it's really nice to actually see how many of us exist. Among us are hundreds of CTOs and VPs of engineering also. So I think that's really important for the next generation coming up. And to that end, it's really important for me to engage with the next generation as much as possible, to show them that it is achievable and that they might be in jobs or environments that aren't friendly to them, but that does not mean that that's the only thing that's out there. There are places where they can go, where they will feel more comfortable, where they don't feel like they have to fight, microaggressions or overt aggressions all day, every day.
And I took a look at some of the organizations that you're part of, and I think the engineering boot camp for women. I think again, it's interesting that if you've never been exposed to STEM, and I think I had somebody else I spoke to on the podcast a couple of years ago and said there's actually a certain age range that if you're not exposed to STEM, you just won't gravitate towards it. And if, let's say, you miss that window and you go your whole life without really being introduced to it, you just don't know. And I think a lot of times, my wife is one of those people where now she looks back and she goes, I love everything technology. I wish I would have gone back. I probably would have been a developer because she's more, I was a software engineer. She likes to tinker more with stuff than I do. And I'm like, yeah, you're probably right. She just never had that exposure. And I think what the Hack Bright organization and some of the other ones that are similar to that, obviously we can't fix everything. If we did, I guess you're right. Neither one of us would probably be at this juncture. But I think education is, to me, I look at it and go, that's where, whether it's early stage, mid-career, people who just weren't introduced. I think that organization you're part of is phenomenal.
Yeah, I love the mission of Hack Bright. So for those who don't know, Hack Bright is an engineering boot camp that's geared towards women. I think it's women only. And that really gives women an environment to learn and to be vulnerable amongst other women, where they don't really have to worry about, what are the other people in the class doing as much. And that's been a really gratifying experience for me too, to see women come to engineering later in their careers. I don't think it's ever too late. I think, we have so much education now, as you were saying, right? There's programs like Hack Bright, there's YouTube, there's, all sorts of free online courses that exist for people who have the luxury of having the time to look into it. But I don't think it's ever too late to join the industry. And Hack Bright, is for people who are mid-career, people who are starting their careers and decide that they want to enter web development or programming.
Absolutely. I guess in terms of advice you'd have, let's say, you're a female senior engineer, you want to get into leadership roles. Is there any advice you'd have for someone who wants to make that transition into a leadership position?
Sure. I always tell women not to sell themselves short. And I sometimes tell this anecdote where I had two people who were working for me who I think were ready to be managers. They're both very empathetic, really had a high degree of responsibility. They really wanted to make sure things were running smoothly. And I proposed to both of them that I thought they would be good candidates to move into managerial roles. And one of them was a man, and his initial response was, "Yeah, sure. I've never done it, but I think I could do it. I think I'll be great at it. No problem." And the woman was much more hesitant. She was like, "I don't know if this is something I really can do. I don't have any experience doing it. Will I actually be good at it?" And with her, I really had to work with her a little bit longer to really show her, look, you're already doing, these sorts of things. This is the kind of behavior I really want to see. And you're really, really good at that. And I really had to work on her for, like a good 2, 3, 4 weeks before she agreed to try. And she's great at it. And I think you have these two people who come with equal amounts of experience. And one of them's been told his whole life, like, no problem. And the other one, has a little bit more hesitance. And so I think really as women, we need to see what our accomplishments are objectively and really don't be afraid to ask for what you want next. A lot of women too, when they want leadership roles, will think to themselves, I'll just work hard and I'll get noticed and I'll get promoted, or I'll get a manager role. And that's not always how it works, right? Managers don't always know what you're looking to do. And if you're not asking for it, if you're not saying, hey, this is really where I want to be next, what is it going to take for me to get there? I think a lot of times women can get left behind.
Awesome. That's great advice. I think, honestly, I hear that a lot, not only just, probably applicable to female engineers, but a lot of times moving to management's a big step for a lot of people. But I think especially if you're female and, thinking like you mentioned, working hard is enough. Sometimes you got to see how you can actually construct and help someone, help you. I guess from that standpoint, I was going to say, if you were to kind of flash forward in terms of what your hopes are for the team, obviously you're 25%, you're going to try to do better. Where would you like the team to go in terms of, how many females, how diverse your team is to maintain a balance?
I don't know that I have a specific number in mind. I think it's really important that the people we continue to bring into the team care about the same things that we care about in terms of diversity, in terms of, doing good engineering work, in terms of cultivating a respectful and friendly work environment. So I think less about the actual final hard number and more about, is the team well equipped to do what they need to do next? I want to see more women on my own leadership team, for sure. I do have one right now, but that number could definitely be better. My ultimate goal is always to manage myself out of a job, to make sure that the people who work for me can learn and do my job, and that the people who work for them, can do their jobs, and eventually that they don't need me anymore. I've taught them everything I have to teach them.
There you go. I like that. That's an awesome viewpoint. Thanks for spending time and sharing. I think some really great points. We'll include your LinkedIn. Is there a preferred way if someone wants to reach out to you and talk to you about anything you mentioned on the podcast?
LinkedIn is perfect.
Okay.
I will also add, I'm happy to chat about any of these issues. I think a lot of women maybe who don't have a mentor could use one. And I think there are a lot of us out there who would be really happy to help. So I think, it never hurts to ask.
Awesome. Again, thanks for being on. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode. We'll be back again, different guests, different topic. I always ask for two things. One, if you find the podcast helpful, insightful, please share it with someone else that you might also think will enjoy it. That's how we've grown. And secondly, if there's a specific topic you'd like me to cover, let me know. Hit me up on LinkedIn. Just let me know and I'll do my best to find someone to speak to it. Until next time, goodbye.